speaker and his guests.
Yes, I'd be happy to. It is my privilege to reintroduce Matt Menz, a 1993 graduate of Jefferson Scranton High School, as well as his proud parents, Lynn and Ellie Menz. And I just think I see his sister Janelle also on the line today. Briefly, from his roots here in Jefferson to stops at UNI, London, England, Stanford Graduate School of Business to head of design at Amazon Web Services, Matt has quite a story to tell. So without further ado, help me welcome Matt Menz back home.
Thank you so much. I will give this a try. We'll see if we can get a good share going here. Let's see. Let's switch that over. Are you seeing a stroppy looking pixelated character?
I see you.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Zoom does not want me to share. It says that it is not secure. Bear with me. I will open my system preferences and allow it access. Apparently, this is the standard technical difficulty that you get with each review.
You're already handling it better than I would. I would just give it, I wouldn't know where to go from there. Like, well, can't do that.
Exactly, like clearly that's not gonna work.
It's called an AV emergency.
Yeah, right. All right, it looks like I need to rejoin. I will be right back.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Jed, thank you for your email about how wonderful Kentucky is. I meant to email you back. Sorry, I forgot.
Jed muted.
I mean, he doesn't have to respond, but I just, that's okay.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I wasn't ignoring you.
It's okay. Hey, there it is.
Hey, Mr. Pixel.
Looking at it from this side too.
No, but when I tried from over there from the other side, it was moving.
All right, and now I'm unmuted. You hearing what I'm, you see me and you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Beautiful. All right, without further ado, thank you, Craig. I will dive straight in. So yes, all of the key pieces happen in this lovely town of Jefferson. It's where we start our adventure. And you know, growing up, I had one really focused goal, and that was to get a motorcycle. And so all of my early careers were really to get to that mission. I needed to make enough money to buy a four-wheeler. And you know, we'll start my journey there. Probably take a few detours along the way, but in order to get this, I tapped into my basic skill sets, as we say, you know, collecting cans. So my parents were incredible entrepreneurs and continue to be, and you know, they had Watkins booths in many of the county fairs as well as the state fair, and so I came along with them. And I was usually the kid hiding with my face in a garbage can, collecting cans to slowly get enough money to get my prize. And when I realized after about 2 years that wasn't moving quickly enough, I started a thriving snow cone franchise, where my parents graciously taught me how to count money, give change, and gave me a corner of their Watkins booth, which ultimately, as you can see, paid off. And then I left all of my career ambitions behind and just played, and had a good time for a few years in the tooling around the backyard on my four-wheeler. And you'll be able to see a trend here: work hard and then take breaks in my life. I left my freewheeling entrepreneurial days and moved into the corporate life in high school, where I worked at Bredo. And ironically, I don't know what Doug was thinking, but he made me a manager as my first job. From those auspicious beginnings, I was able to then work at the DOT over a number of summers while I was at college. Which was amazing because it gave me this really great diversity of, you mentioned before, like construction work. It's working incredibly hard, but getting exposure to surveying and civil engineering and, the life I didn't want to do longer term, because I saw how physically and emotionally tough it was, which really led me then to UNI. UNI was always the goal. I had two goals: get that four-wheeler and then get to college. So, and UNI was kind of the only option in my head at the time. My father, my uncle, aunts, cousins all had graduated from there. And once I was lucky enough to get in, I kind of ran out of goals, right? I was like, all right, I'm here. I guess the next thing I need to do is, the simple things: find a dream job, find a partner, have 2.5 kids, and have a house with a white picket fence. Like that's kind of what the intent was. I didn't really know what to do next. Otherwise, I knew I needed to pay for it. Hence my 18-hour days working at the TOT for 3 summers. Well, I loved to paint in high school. So logically, accounting seemed like a good career path. So my first major at UNI was business, and I spent the better part of 3 years exploring multiple majors that became great extracurricular credits. I was kind of ultimately drawn by things I realized I couldn't build a career and I couldn't make money, but it was the only thing I had any aptitude for, which was craft and technology. It's like I can do things with my hands and I can kind of understand how things work. And so I got really pulled into printing, like drafting and offset lithography and different forms of printmaking. And I was like, clearly this isn't going to lead me anywhere, but it's fun. And I've already had a few majors, so let's try this for a while. Well, that opened the door because it introduced me by chance to graphic design. And that is really the practice of, printmaking, moving into print publications. So creating books, creating magazines, posters, etc. So it's like creating a visual representation. Oftentimes it's used in advertising. The hook for me was this was all about the emergence of the computer. My dad had the early Macintosh back in the late 80s, and I was like, that is something I want to be a part of. And when I started in college, it was just starting to be possible, and I dumped every penny that I didn't have into my own computer for the first time. And that changed everything because it allowed me for the first time to teach myself. And I was able to go to class, but then I would go and scurry away in my dorm and later apartment to just learn and play. You know, I had my first big graphic design job was I did the 1996 UNI yearbook, and realized very quickly that traditional graphic design wasn't the thing I was going to do forever. But this internet thing was really interesting. And it was really, really early days. But I taught myself, I started to work at the Center for Educational Technology. So it's a small group where we would build brochures and things for different professors at the college. But one of the core things was it allowed me to teach myself HTML, very rudimentary things that allow you to publish a website. And so this is actually my first portfolio, my first resume, that I was like, well, I'm going to need to work. So let me see if I can teach myself how to present myself and create a website. This was probably 94, 95. And I made the key realization that I could bring another passion of mine, which is photography, into the board. And if you look in the top left corner, you see this incredibly striking tall gentleman standing there. Well, the key to getting a job in the early internet is to get the very first digital cameras and take pictures of yourself spinning around in your living room and put that on the internet. So when in doubt, that's the trick. So we can do that as a follow-on. If anyone wants to, anyone wants lessons on spinning folks with socks and sandals on, this is the key. Well, thankfully, someone looked past all of this. And I was able to get a full-time job at Team Technologies, which is a place in Cedar Falls. It was a small agency. It was the first time I was really able to work with other customers, with clients, and thankfully was kind of thrown into the deep end really quickly. They were working with Dow AgroSciences and a number of financial groups, including Principal. And over the couple of years I was there, I was really deeply engaged in doing the very first web-based applications for Principal. They brought a lot of their things from back-end servers at the time to using browsers. And it kind of gave me this hint of like, there's something here. And this is a really rare internal tool only, never was published externally. But I was like, there's something here. And my ability to learn and catch on was kind of continuing, which led to an opportunity for me to take my first big move. And that was to Boston. And I did it in a way that made a lot of people question, because I left at 7 o'clock sharp, January 1st, 2000. I remember many people going, but Y2K, you're not even going to be able to get gas on the way. I'm like, it's fine, let's go. So I drove across the country and moved to Boston, where I worked at a company called Sapient. It was basically this Team Technologies, but at a much bigger scale. So we were working with a number of projects. One of my first one was with IBM, and it was, again, the first unified communications suite. So this was 2000, 2001, we had the opportunity to really build the first Zoom, the first Slack, and it was like text messaging, video messaging, and meeting spaces on a browser for the first time for their company, which you can imagine was a transformative notion of like, wait, you can do this stuff, back in the old webcam days, and allowed us to really start pushing some interesting pieces. I also had the chance to work on a more consumer things where we worked with Fila, and this was really my first international client, where I worked with the team was based in Milan. And we had, my first notion of, the move from Jefferson to Boston was a really profound culture shock. I didn't realize the world was different in different places. And then the world opened a little bit more having to meet and work with people with really different views than I had, and realizing that that was okay and that we could make each other better at what we did by being open to those conversations. And then, you know, I had chances to work with other financial institutions. This was for Mass Mutual. And this was really the first time when I started to work not just on the presentation, like what things look like. It was really why things work the way they work. And that's really the heart of what design is. It's understanding what a person needs, really empathizing with them, and then creating an experience for them. It's a gift. It's how you help them achieve something. And, you know, this was like, how do you buy life insurance? Right? It was like, oh, I have something happens. I need to learn about it. I need to decide. I need to get it. Then once I have it, I need to figure out how to manage it. And all right, what do we do as a company at each one of these stages to help that person? That then led on to projects where I actually moved to San Francisco for I don't know, 6 months, 8 months, where I built the first version of Walmart.com. It was the first checkout experience when I was working with credit card companies, you know, figuring out what we take for granted today. But for 6 months, I was like, great, you need a name and an address and a zip code, but what about a postcode? And like just trying to understand the informational connections to physically make a transaction on the internet. And after that project, I was tired. Like I had spent 5 years building websites, many different versions of websites along the way, and I was ready for something else. And thankfully, the world collapsed at the same time and said, you probably should go and do something else. This was around 2002, where all of the .com companies that were funding the work that I was doing took a couple of years off. And thankfully at that time, something else was emerging, mobile. You know, this was when we used black and white screens with tiny little postage stamps, which really wasn't about graphic design anymore. It wasn't about web design. It was like, well, what could this thing be when it grows up? And I landed in such a great way at a group called the Advanced Concepts Group. And this is a small team, it's about 10 of us, based just outside of the MIT Media Lab. And we were able to work with some amazing researchers there to look at social, technical, and manufacturing roadmaps and trends. And really take that step back and go, what's the next big thing? What's possible in 5 years? What's improbable in 10, right? And start making these concepts of what could happen. And one of the ideas that came out of that was, what if a phone could be really personal but luxurious, something that felt that you could be proud of? And it was really thin and simple. You know, then the professionals took the concept over and created the Razor. But that was really this essence of what could come next. That then evolved into some work in the very, very early, what we call today smartphones. You know, on the left was the A920, I think it was called. It was about 1 inch thick, but it was basically the second or third phone commercially sold that had a camera in it, that had the ability, and it had a GPS, so you could geolocate. It had, you know, we designed video calling, we designed photo editing apps for the first time. And this was about 4 years before the iPhone came out. Now, this was before touchscreens where you could use your finger. It was, you know, the old styluses and stuff. And because the US didn't have the 3G networks at the time, didn't have the data to actually use any of this stuff. And, you know, to take a video call was like $4 a minute. These things were really emerging in Japan and Europe. And that led really for the opportunity for me to make the move to London and start the design studio for Motorola there. and in the first few years, I really became the spokesperson for the company with all of the key partners. So this is, you know, like the Verizons of Europe, Southeast Asia, Japan, and Africa. And I just traveled, going from, you know, Dusseldorf back and forth a dozen times, and kind of around Europe and Asia. And you know, the highlights were really spending a couple of weeks in Tokyo with symmetrical translation as we talked, as we negotiated, right? They would say, here's the 5,000 line items that we want to see in your phone. And I would say, thank you very much. I understand request 273. We are not able to comply at this time. So my notion of design and helping people got bent there for a little bit, but it helped me really understand the dynamics in the business of how these things, how people, you know, the filters ideas go through before they actually get to people, which allowed me to come back to my center a little bit more, which was designing things. And so we created, you know, a number of, you know, you can kind of see through the years, actually, each line is a progression of the versions. And kind of in the middle there was when Android started. And this was really, really early Android versions. And that kind of tipped the ability for me to start working with Google on some of their early smartphone platforms. You know, and through this time, we shipped hundreds and hundreds of different phones to, you know, tens of millions of people. And it really was amazing to get that exposure to the industrial design and the surfacing engineering and the supply chain aspects of what it takes to build something which is on the surface just a battery and a screen, but all of the different variations of how that works and how you build it cheaply enough, and the trade-offs that a business needs to make a consumer product. So that ultimately, you know, gave me the ability and the opportunity to move back to the US, where I started to lead the design team for Motorola. It was a group of about 85 people in Chicago, San Francisco, Beijing, Seoul, and Sao Paulo. So it was my first time then to kind of manage a globally distributed, internationally distributed team, which was really fun, again, to understand, like, how do you work in these different places at the same time to meet the teams where they need to be, meet the markets, because the phone that sells incredibly well in the US doesn't sell at all in South America. And you need, because of social and economic differences in those countries at that time, you needed to think about the person, think about the situation they were in, and then create something for them. And all of this then led to the Google transition, which was a really quite an amazing thing for me, because I was one of the few leaders at the time who made it into Google. And it allowed us to just rethink the entire portfolio. We started from scratch in a way. We had, I think, 100 simultaneous phones in the Motorola days, and we cut it down to one when we shifted to Google. And we said, we're going to do one right. And we created 3 different kind of platforms. One was, what am I going to do with a pocket computer? What am I going to do with a wearable device? And at that time, this was, you know, years before that Apple Watch, but like, how do we do a wrist-based platform? And then what do we do with accessories? How do I, you know, in my car or just walking around, how do I start using more ambient technology? And that led to a lot more research, you know, to kind of go back to those early advanced concept days. It was just like, what are people doing? What happens? What information do we have? You're like, okay, if I have a device on me, I know where the person is. I know what time it is. I know who it is. I know what other devices they've got. Oh, what's possible to start creating things? So this is really a critical part from my progression, where we started to, you know, put the person at the center of everything you do that you're trying to create for, and work backwards from that. What do we want them to achieve? What do we want them? How do we want to help them? and then work to make that appropriate with the technology, the cost constraints that we had at the time. And after a couple of years then with Google, I got tired and needed a break. So I took a break and really had my first retirement. And instead of retiring and sitting, I just kept moving. And so for my wife left her job at the time as well. And for the better part of 9 months, we just moved. And we slowly worked our way around the world, understanding how people live, really trying to take that designer's perspective of empathy to understand, what is it like to be someone in Stockholm. Thankfully, I have family there, so I have a sneaky way in to understand that culture versus somebody in Southeast Asia. To kind of marinate a little bit in how the world works outside of the places I've been lucky enough to live. It also allowed me to really reflect and come back to some things that were earlier passions that my dad really planted, which was photography and a love for documenting the world, and kind of stepping back in that technical craft of these, seeing the world through the lens and exploring time in the notion of photography. Each one of these pictures I took over the span of seconds to 4 hours in a single image, and it just became time to play and explore and kind of go back to that moment when I got my first computer and was able to start teaching myself. It was this nice time to kind of re-tap into just play again, where I was trying to do things for me for the first time in a really long time. And you may have noticed that I said that we were traveling for 9 months. You can imagine what happens when a newly married couple goes traveling for 9 months. At the end of that, there's a result. So my new project began, and my son was born. And for about 9 months after that, I was able to stay at home and be a full-time papa with that little munchkin, who's, as we were saying with Craig earlier, is 7 now. So that was probably my most important career stage, was the year of nurturing full time. My wife lasted about 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and she's like, "I'm going back to work." I'm like, "Go for it, I got it." Well, after all this time of kind of agency work and then working, in the web and then mobile, I wanted to just do something different. I had time to really think. And so, I don't know how many of you watch Seinfeld, but George Costanza, one of the characters, has this episode where he just does the opposite. Whatever his natural inclination is, he's like, "That's wrong. I'm going to do the opposite and see what happens." And that's really what I started doing. Like, I had done all of this consumer stuff, and I was like, I want to do the opposite for a while. I want no hardware involved. I want to explore just, software, and I want to work not just on Android, but this thing called iOS came out, and Microsoft had other things. And there's a lot of other ways to bring your ideas to the world. And so I started working at Citrix, which is really an enterprise company. And it provided a great learning opportunity, not only as to how businesses worked, because they were very much, Google was just the CEO and like 6 of us, and we would sit down and make decisions every day. Whereas shifting to Citrix, it was like 4 different businesses, and each business wanted something completely different. And that was a really interesting challenge for me to go from this very hierarchical view to a very distributed view. And so I learned a lot through that practice. And at the time then, the team I was responsible for was kind of in the 200, 250 range to span all of these different projects. And and this is when data became a thing where we could actually start learning, not just by talking to people, but by seeing how they worked. So we could see as they moved through a website what they clicked on, and how, if 100 people started, only 8% of them would sign up. And of that sign up, this was actually for a product exactly like Zoom. For how many people then would start and schedule a meeting. So we were starting to go like, okay, well, clearly what we're doing, if only 1% of the people who go actually start a meeting, we need to fix some things. So we're able to really start working from that information to change how we approached them. You said better signal of like, how do we do our jobs better? How do we make people successful? And then that led to where I am today, which is Amazon Web Services. It's been a really interesting 4.5 years. I started there when there were 75 services. So you could think of each service as a product, as kind of a standalone product, like a startup. And each one of those startups has a team of designers and engineers and product people and business people. And that over the last 4 years went from 75 to over 200. We just crossed 200 teams or 200 businesses. Some of these businesses are billion-dollar businesses, and some of them are just starting, and some of them are scaling and getting really big. But it was also this really interesting way for me to just go into a world where I didn't know anything. And I kind of fooled them enough to let me play around and learn. And so we've built I started out as a scrappy team of about 25, and we created the first machine learning products and the robotics products and Internet of Things products and blockchain and data lakes. Like we kind of joke that we have the PhD program for acronyms. Each week we just talk about all the stuff that's coming because someone in the company is working on it, and I'm just in a really lucky position to look across all of these teams to help them design them, research them, design them, and write all of the content for them. And so through this time now, the team has grown and is almost 600, and that, as you could imagine, has been a really interesting evolution as well, going from how you think about helping the people through the products you build is different when you're doing it with a group of 5 people versus at scale. And so that's been an amazing gift as well, not without its challenges. But we basically build tools that allow companies to build their offerings and allow governments to build their offerings. These basically, we're on Zoom today, and Zoom is based on AWS. So the videos are going through the servers that are at Amazon right now. And a number of different companies around the world use these capabilities to provide their offerings, whether it's a car service or Netflix. Some of the bigger groups that have been built completely with AWS and with the tools that I have the opportunity to create is being able to help invent new economies, right? That the notion of renting your house was built with the tools and is hosted and designed with AWS. Smart irrigation systems, really from an ecological perspective, where I actually have one of these at my house as well because it never rains in California, and through these sensor hubs and the ability to have analytics and learning, you can save 10,000 gallons a year at a normal house, a single house. The impact of that is huge. With the work with Coursera and multiple other online learning, it allows us to bring Ivy League educations to anyone. It really democratizes learning. If you have access to the internet, whether it's just a browser on a Chromebook or a device, if you're in a culture where you haven't come up through owning personal computers, you actually can get the same level of access and learning, and like the transformation that will have on the world is incredible. But most of the time we just want to sit down and be entertained. And so Netflix is another amazing company that has been built entirely on what we do at AWS. And so it's been fun to see and play a tiny part in how these really transformative businesses impact all of our lives. And so as I was kind of looking through this journey, I haven't really thought about my own path. So thank you, Craig, in a kind of strange way for helping me reevaluate a little bit. But as I was looking through, I came across something that's always really resonated with me, and I'll leave you all with this as a kind of a thought. It's this Japanese concept I first bumped into when I was in Tokyo. It's called ikigai, not ikigai, ikigai, which is this Japanese concept, which is effectively what's the meaning or what's the reason for your being, like what satisfies you. And oftentimes, when you think about how you engage, it's people say, do what you love. That's great. You can have a passion and a mission, it overlaps with what the world needs and what you're good at. And, thankfully I did that for a while. I had an opportunity to do that. While I was in Europe, I found some things I was good at and I figured out what I could be paid for, and I had a profession, but I didn't love it. And I also could be paid for what the world wanted at the time, which was like mobile technology and those kinds of things. And it feels like, I hope for all of us, we get closer and closer to that center piece where we find passion and vocation in something that can be acknowledged in the world. I don't think any of us lives in any one of these spots forever. We cycle through because we change. The world changes around us, and what we are good at and what we like and what the world needs changes. But it has been a really interesting framework for me to think about what I do, why I do it, and kind of gut check of okay, well, if you're gonna take a left, why are you taking that left? Are you being drawn to something that you're really passionate about, or are you trying to pay the mortgage now? And just being honest with that progression. Are you trying to help people ultimately, or are you trying to help yourself? And they're all valid, but just being honest with myself and my family and about where I am and where I want to be. This is yielded months of introspection. So I kind of leave you with ikigai. That's it. I will take any thoughts or questions or.
I mean, I have, oh, go ahead, Jackie.
I can't see you. I can
Let me
switch back to where we can see you.
Let me merge, come
there.
back. Am I there?
No.
I think when I came back on, I might have been blown up. There I am.
There you are. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, I was just gonna say, or ask, I guess, did you have a sense in the really early days? I guess maybe you said when you were at UNI, and I don't remember if you said you were at Cedar Rapids or Cedar Falls, but in that sort of time frame, did you have a sense that this was the wave of the future, or were you just doing something that you enjoyed and that you could make some money from?
With the web, once I had my first job where it was at Team, where it was actually like I had a back door in and I could see what was happening. I was like, well, everyone's clearly gonna have to do this. Like it became very obvious very quickly from that vantage point. At that point, everyone just had printed brochures and it was the first time to put them online, right? It was just let people know your company exists in a new way before we started selling things and, you know, living in that world. But it was just this little sliver, you know, you could see the door open and you're like, yeah, clearly that's where we're going.
Do you have any ideas about what's next?
Oh boy, yeah.
Or is that just like because it's a once in a lifetime sort of thing? It's impossible to know.
Well, I mean, the irony is I've been lucky to stumble into 3 once in a lifetime things. So I think there's always another one, you know, to kind of go into the web, into mobile, and now into kind of cloud architectures. And what's happening, you know, what has happened over the last 10 years with moving the way we work, you know, online, and able to do that at scale and in a really cost-effective way, like it's going to change everything. You know, the company grew. My little part of Amazon grew from, I think, 7 billion when I started, and now it's like 42 over 4 years. And it's just at the beginning days. This is going to be the next 30, 40 years, and just the way things work across the board. So it's fascinating to see the companies that were the kind of early adopters, right? They saw like, oh, this is cheaper, faster, and easier way to start a business. And they started Netflix and Pinterest and Expedia, and like all of these companies saw that it just is cheaper and a better way to run their business. And now we're starting to see the larger, more entrenched legacy companies start going, I could save a few $100 million a year. That seems good. Maybe I should think about this. And so for the next decade, it will be about saving money more than anything else. But in that savings, it opens up potential, and it's a toolkit to play. So we're starting to see companies that just, you know, they were limited to crayons for the first 20 years of their life, and now they're Technicolor, and they're like, oh, we can have sensors and analytics and machine learning, and, you know, we can start to tell stories based on how people engage with our products and do it in a way that helps them and makes us, you know, make more money with less overhead. So I think that there's a lot there. And you could get into the specifics, you know, robotics and, you know, blockchain and like these enabling pieces. But I think that there's a lot of once in a lifetime things that will happen over the next kind of 10 to 20 years.
Quick explanation of what is blockchain and what it's used for.
I think that's not a quick question. The easiest way to say is that it's a public ledger. So if I have something and I give it to you, in the act of giving it to you, there's a shared spreadsheet that everyone has access to that logs that it went from me to you. It's just a way of tracking movement of things. And that then enables currency and supply chains and a number of pieces. I think, again, that's one of the obvious things that will shift, because it's nothing you can lie. You can't cheat blockchain, because it's totally distributed across the board.
Matt, do you have any friends over at Twitter? And if so, what are they talking about now?
The funny thing is, I don't have a lot of friends at Twitter, but I can imagine they're talking about all the same things we're talking about.
Matt, so much of what you have done has resulted from creative thought and being receptive to new opportunities, and there's just seems to be a thread that goes through your life that's about creativity. How do you help I'm thinking about, about the forge that's here. How do you help other young people, our young people here in Jefferson? How do we help them have that kind of creative openness to developing new things?
Yeah, I think what I have discovered in my own view is I needed to know it was possible. I think it's very, very easy to be safe and trust the thing that you can do. The case in point, one of the most pivotal shifts I think that I had was I was offered a full-time job at the DOT after college, and I was like, I will never make that much money ever. It was astronomical. What from my perspective, that's I'm set for life. Like I'm done. But I knew I needed to do something different. And I think it's nurturing curiosity. Like that for me is the biggest power. Like traveling with my parents as a kid, like just knowing that was possible. And then taking not being afraid of the baby steps, because every one of my I was going right and I turned left was terrifying. But when I was sitting in Boston and had an opportunity to move to London, I said, well, I can't not do that. I can't in 5 years, it's going to totally turn my life upside down. And it did. I ended up getting a divorce. I ended up completely having a topsy-turvy experience, but it was probably the best experiences of my life. And so being open to not knowing the future and being scared, that's, I think, core to my, the little path that I've played, and it may work for other people and it may not.
Wow.
Can I just ask very quickly what years you were in London? Because I lived there 2009 to 2017 or so. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, we overlapped. I was there for 04 to 10.
Okay.
Yeah, we can talk. I was,
yeah.
Was it Richmond, Islington were my two cities.
Okay. I was North London, South London, West London, so I was all over.
Yeah, that's the way it works. Every 6 months, you're like, let me try somewhere else.
Yeah.
I like whoever is the Ireland map. I've been hypnotized trying to figure out their journeys through Ireland.
That's Jim. He can't figure out how to change his backdrop.
I like it. The big question is, does it all make sense, Mom and Dad? Because I can't tell you, everyone, how many times, every time I see them, they're like, so what do you do? And who taught you how to do that? Because we didn't teach you how to do that. Oh, you're still.
Come back here.
Okay.
There you go.
As soon as you started talking, of course, we were both lost right away.
Okay, good.
We may have to have another session all by ourselves to get the.
Yeah. I think the simple thing is I do things with stuff, and every 5 years I move.
That works. That works. I can understand that. Oh, wow.
We're proud of you, son.
Absolutely. Who would have thought?
Matt, I really thank you for sharing today and going through the phases that you went through. I'd love to have all of our high school students and listen to this. So I hope this is, number one, archived, and number two, with your permission, I hope we could share this with some other students to inspire them to think about where they want to be in life. So thank you so much. Just an excellent presentation, Matt.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being patient.
We loved it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.